When you get an objection from a prospect, you have two choices on how to respond: build a wall or build a bridge. Now, it's important to keep in mind, as we're talking about overcoming objections, that prevention is always going to be your best course of action whenever possible. Ultimately, you want to overcome your anticipated objections in casual conversation before your buyer has a chance to verbalize them. We'll cover why this is important in part 2, but for now, just know, as Ben Franklin said, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and that certainly holds true in professional selling. But no matter how hard you try, objections are going to come up, and you want to be prepared to handle them. To overcome objections like a top sales professional, you need to know what objections are. You need to know what not to do, and you have to practice the 4 C's. So what are objections? What does it really mean when your prospect expresses a concern with your solution? The bottom line is, when a buyer expresses genuine concern, it can be a sign of trust and interest. And in most cases, objections can be seen as a buying signal. If the objection is a genuine concern in the prospect's mind, it's actually a gift that she shared that concern with you instead of just keeping it to herself. So when you get an objection, stop worrying about your own needs and start really listening to your buyer. Now here's the crazy part. When you get stressed out, your body increases blood cortisol levels, which is shown to impair your cognitive ability. What does that mean to you? The more stressed you get about an objection, the harder it will be for you to think on your feet and come up with a solution. Man, I'm getting stressed out just thinking about it. So what's the key? Again, stop thinking about your own needs and start really listening to what your buyer's saying. Think of it this way: your prospect trusts you enough and is interested enough in your solution to share her concern. If there was no interest, or if you had not built trust, why would they even waste their time expressing their concern? In fact, do you know what the most difficult objection to overcome is? It's the one that you don't know about. If you don't know that a buyer has a concern, how can you possibly help them work through that concern? Again, stop worrying about yourself and your own needs and start genuinely listening to the buyer and really help make the connection between her needs and the value that your solution offers. Now that you know to relax when an objection does get brought up, let's talk about what not to do. Sometimes that's a little bit easier. Okay, here's what not to do. When your buyer brings up an objection, you know not to get nervous and not to be defensive. And in most cases, you also want to make sure you handle the objection right away. So in other words, don't deflect or postpone your response. Most sales professionals will agree that postponing or deflecting objections will only build a wall between you and your buyer and will actually increase her chances of defending her position. Now, there are some exceptions to this rule, but generally speaking, deflecting is not the way to go. When an objection does come up, that is the time to stop the conversation and very calmly address the concern and work to help the buyer see a different perspective on the value proposition your solution offers. The good news is there's a really easy way to do this. So let's talk about the formula for overcoming objections. We call it the 4 C's. First, you must cushion the objection. Cushioning is critical because it helps prevent building a wall between you and your prospect. In fact, it's actually the first step in building a bridge to help the buyer see a different perspective. Next, you must clarify their concern. I've seen sales professionals miss this step, and it can be painful. If you don't clarify, you run the risk of trying to overcome the wrong objection. And in some cases, you can actually create additional concerns for the buyer to worry about. So be sure to clarify first so you're having the right discussion with your prospect. Once you clarify the concern, only then are you ready to help change the buyer's perspective and continue to build that bridge to help the buyer see the value that your solution offers and why your solution is the best option for her. And finally, once you and your buyer are on the same page, you want to confirm their new perspective and make sure there are no underlying concerns that they still have before you move on with the rest of your sales dialogue. So there you have it, the 4 C's: cushion, clarify, change, and confirm. The 4 C's are actually pretty easy, and with practice, they really can be. Believe it or not, where most sales professionals make a mistake is with the first 2 steps. And if you miss those, things can get rough. That's because cushioning and then clarifying before you try to change their perspective is critical to preventing a wall being built between you and your prospect. In fact, when you do these first 2 steps correctly, you actually build a bridge to help them see a better perspective. You see, you have to show your buyer that you understand her perspective without sounding trite and saying, "I understand." And at the same time, you don't want to validate her concern by agreeing with her. Only once the buyer feels that you understand her and that she's being heard will she then feel comfortable enough to explain the real concern, which will give you the information you need to help properly address the objection. Let's take a look at this example. Your buyer says they like your product, but that your financing options are not going to work. First, you cushion their response. You might say something like, "Yes, it's important that you're getting the best value over time." Now notice, we're not validating their concern by specifically agreeing with her. Next, you need to clarify what the specific concern is so you're overcoming the correct concern. For example, what if your competitor is offering an interest-free option, and therefore you start defending your higher interest rate, only to find out the prospect is actually concerned about the timing of the monthly payments, not the interest rate. Oops, now you just gave her a new objection. So be sure to clarify the concern before you start trying to overcome the concern. Something like, "Tell me more about," and then finish the sentence from there based on the conversation. Now in this example, your prospect is comparing your interest rate to your competitor's interest-free financing. While you can't compete on interest rate, it's likely there's a different perspective that you can help the buyer see. Perhaps the total cost of ownership for your product is lower because you offer a 5-year service plan and your competitor doesn't. Once you've received a positive reaction, confirm with the buyer that you're on the same page before moving on. This can be as easy as, "Makes sense, doesn't it?" Or, "Do you see how this works?" At this point, you can probably see why the formula works, but you may not be sure about how to implement it out in the field. Don't worry, these steps get easier as you practice. First, let's take a closer look to the 2 most important steps. In this example, a prospective renter is telling a leasing agent that her furniture won't fit in the living room. The first response of the leasing agent may be to defend the floor plan and explain that the room looks small only because it's empty. Now, while this may actually be true, the renter is not likely to buy into that concept enough right now to go ahead and sign the lease. So first, cushion without validating. Then, gather more information. The conversation might look something like this. The prospective renter says, "This living room is way too small. I don't think all my furniture will fit." The sales professional, taking time to cushion without validating, responds, "Good point. It's important that we can make this room feel like home. Tell me a little bit about your furniture." Why is cushioning so important? It helps build a bridge between your perspective and the buyer's concern. Without this step, it's likely your buyer will go into defense mode, which builds a wall instead of that bridge. And it makes it much more difficult for you to have a productive conversation. Now remember, clarifying helps you get a better idea of what the buyer is specifically concerned with so that you can help them see a different perspective. Now in this example, once you know your buyer has received other quotes, getting an idea of what she's been told by your competitors can help you better understand her concern. Now that you've cushioned the objection so that your buyer knows you're genuinely interested in her perspective, you're starting to build that bridge. Further, you've clarified to make sure that you're talking about the exact same concern. Now, and only now, are you ready to start addressing her perspective and helping her see a different way at looking at the value of your product? Now to do this, you must be able to leverage your 8 knowledge bases and really know your industry and your market, so you have to do your homework. The Changing Perspective breakout session will provide detailed information to help you prepare for the 3rd step in overcoming objections. Keep in mind that without building trust with your prospect through all your interactions before and during this part of the sales cycle, and without cushioning first and letting your buyer know that she's been heard and understood, it's unlikely she would feel comfortable enough to share valuable information that you'll need to help change her perspective. So building trust is an absolute must when it comes to overcoming objections. We've covered a lot in this session, and even though it may go against your common reaction, always remember, cushion first, then clarify before you start trying to change the perspective of your prospect. Soak it all up, review your notes, and I'll see you in the next session.